What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Foundations and Frontlines podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Wright, and it's good to be back on the podcast again. This podcast is sponsored by His Light Ministries. If you're looking for a good church, you can go to www.hislightministry.org. Also on this podcast, if you look in the comments below and you see the link, you can go ahead and click on that. We got some deals at some other stores as well where you can get anywhere from 10% to 15 to 20% off, depending on what store you are shopping at. And we do get a commission if you use our deal. It's called Faith in Action, and it'll help sponsor this podcast as well. Music is Shield of Faith, and it is by Spiritual Warfare Music. And so it's good to be back this week on the podcast again. And today we want to deal on the front lines of one of the hot topics about abortion. What is the Christian stance when it comes to abortion? And how do we respond to those who are pro-choice? Now, I will say this, as a believer, as a Christian, I am pro-life. I believe in the sanctity of life. As a pastor, I preach and teach that abortion is murder, because that is my view according to the Word of God, and that's God's view. In the Ten Commandments, God commanded us as believers that we shall not murder, and we look at all human life, whether out of the womb or in the womb, as a precious life created by the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, as Christians, I believe we should defend the sanctity of life. But the fact of the matter is, we live in a world, a fallen world, where abortion is a real thing. So on the front lines, when you come into contact with those who disagree and are pro-choice or believe in abortion, you know, how is the Christian supposed to react? How are they what is their stance? You know, what is their basis on what they should tell others? And we're not just going to go on one side and talk about a pro-life's argument. We're actually going to look into what the arguments are of somebody who's pro-choice or agrees with abortion, and we'll go from there. Now, I know some of our female viewers who may be pro-choice may hear my voice and say, well, you're a man and you should have no right, or you should have no say in this because you're not a woman. You don't know what pregnancy is like. And so that's fair. So, but even though my wife isn't here physically, we're going to get her on the line. She couldn't be here in person, but I do have her on the phone waiting. So she's going to be able to talk to us over the phone. So let me see if I can get her on the phone, and we will go from there. Well, actually, before I get her on the phone, I want to go over some stats. According to the Guttmacher Institute, it looks like there was over 1,038,100 clinically provided abortions in the United States last year in 2024. So as a believer and as a Christian, I look at that number and I see over 1 million innocent lives taken or murdered. And that, for me, is just a horrific thing. Now, again, we're going to get into the arguments here in the debates about, you know, the difference between pro-life and pro-choice. But, and I know most pro-choice people, they gravitate towards the argument that, you know, if the woman or the mother's life is at risk, or if they are raped, or if there's incest that happens and causes a pregnancy, that they should have the right to have an abortion. But before we get into that debate and argument and talk about it, I want to give you the stats here. According to the Lazier Institute, the percentage of abortions, 95.9% of abortions are elected, and there is no risk to the mother's life. It's just basically, we don't have the finances, or I don't want to be a parent right now, or it's too stressful for me, or I can't handle it, or it'll quote-unquote ruin my life. 95.9% of abortions happen just because of parents not wanting to take responsibility for their actions. So again, 95.9% of those over a million abortions that happened last year was just because they didn't want to be a parent. But yet they didn't want they didn't want to have to deal with having a child. And I'll just say this: that's an awful thing. That's a horrible thing to want to have an abortion just because you don't want to be a parent yet. And as a believer, it sickens me. I know that's a strong word, but it does. The fact of the matter is, if, as the saying goes, if you're going to play the game, you're going to win certain prizes, and you need to be ready for the prizes you may win. And I'll say it this way, children, according to the Bible, are supposed to be a blessing, and they are. And so, to throw away a blessing like that of a human life and being a parent, it's such a wonderful gift that the Lord has given us. But according to the other stats, 2.2% had abortions for other physical health concerns. 1.2% had abortions because of abnormality in the unborn baby. They thought it was going to have defects or some kind of disease or syndrome or something, so they just decided to abort it rather than take care of the child. Now, look at this. According to the stats, only 0.4, not even 1%, 0.4% of abortions were because of a rape and incest. Now, any rape or any incest is horrible. But when you look at the big picture of over 1 million abortions, not even 1%, 0.4% are due to rape and incest. And then look at this, 0.3% is because of the risk of the mother's life or a major bodily function concern. So even when you add those two up, that's only 0.7%. That's not even 1%, but yet that seems to be the pro-choice's biggest argument is, the risk of the mother's life or rape and incest, but it doesn't even add up to 1%. It's actually 0.7%. So out of all of those abortions that happened last year, which was 1,038,100 abortions, only 7,268 of those abortions added up to risk of the mother's life or rape or incest. And so, again, we're going to get into those dialogue and talk about that as well. But, that is what the numbers show us. So, to have that as your biggest argument, I think is incorrect. You can't take your biggest argument that's less than 1% and try to flip that around and try to use that as your greatest defense. And because over almost 96% of abortions are just because they don't want to be a parent and take responsibility. So again, let's get into the top 10 arguments of pro-choice, people who have a view on abortion. And I'm going to get here my wife on the phone and have her talk with me about it because, again, I know most people would say, well, you're a man, which it shouldn't matter because, I'm an American, I'm a Christian, and, everybody has the right to have their opinion. But for argument's sake, because I am a man, I will get my wife on the phone here, and I will have her as well, even though she can't physically be here, talk and deal with this. So let me get her on the phone here.
Hello? Am I on the podcast? Did I get through? Is this Foundations and Frontlines podcast? It's good to talk with everybody about this. I was listening and I was hearing that you was talking about abortion, so I thought I would try to call in and talk about it and get my view on it.
Hello? Who is this? And how did you get through to our podcast? That is not my wife, folks. Could you give me your name and your location at where you're at and why you're on this podcast this afternoon?
Well, I don't have a name really because you see, I'm still in my mommy's womb. And I thought since I was in my mommy's womb that I would be a great person to discuss about abortion. So even though I don't have a name, because of course my mommy hasn't given me a name yet, God knows me. And I only know that because I hear my mommy reading the Bible while I'm in the womb trying to sleep. And in Jeremiah, it says that God knew me even in my mommy's womb. So even though I don't have a name yet, God knows me. And that should be good enough for me to be able to talk on this podcast.
Okay. So this is interesting. So, okay. So I think you would be a great choice to talk about this since you are speaking for unborn babies right now. So, okay. So again, it's not my wife, but a great person to be able to talk with over the podcast. So perfect. All right. So a pro-choice's argument. One of the first arguments they say is that nearly all abortions take place in the first trimester when a fetus is attached by the placenta and umbilical cord to the mother. And as such, its health is dependent on her health and cannot be regarded as a separate entity as it cannot exist outside her womb. So basically, the argument is number one, it's my body, so it's my choice. So tell us, what is your take on that?
Well, I would have to disagree that it's not my body, my choice. Because you see, when the abortion is done, if it was her body, it just wouldn't kill the unborn baby, but it would kill the mother. Because if it's her body, then that means she would die too from the drug that's inserted into the unborn baby. So it's really not my body, my choice. It's mommy's choice to terminate the life of the unborn baby, which I don't think is right. Because even though they may call me a fetus or a clump of cells or not a baby yet, I'm still a human species. So if I'm a human species, I should have human rights, right? And human rights means that I should have the right to live. That's one of the biggest rights of being a human, being able to live, especially in America, where I should be able to pursue whatever I want to do when I'm born, whatever colleges I want to go to, or anything in life I may decide. So it doesn't decide on where my development is, because really humans are always developing, whether inside the womb or outside the womb. A 2-year-old outside the womb is still developing. They learn to walk, they learn to talk, they learn to eat. Teenagers are still developing. That's why they go through puberty. Their voices changes, they grow, they have growth spurts. And so you can't base having an abortion on where they are in development. But really, life starts at conception. So at the moment of conception, I believe you're a human species and you're part of the human species and you should have human rights.
Okay. That is a very, very good point. Just because you're inside the womb doesn't make you less of a human, because you're still a human species, so you should have human rights. And the fundamental human right is, the right to live. So very good point. So what about this next argument that, those who are pro-choice may give? They may say the concept of personhood is different from the concept of human life, that human life occurs at conception, but fertile eggs used for vitro fertilization are also human lives, and those are not implanted are routinely thrown away. So is this murder? If not, then how is abortion murder? Can you give us a little insight on that?
Well, honestly, there is no civilized society that permits one human to intentionally harm or take the life of another human without punishment. And I believe abortion is no different. That abortion is just flat out murder. Period.
Okay. All right. Okay. So what about this third argument? You know, some pro-choice people who believe in abortion would say adoption is not alternative to abortion because it remains the woman's choice whether or not to give her child up for adoption. Stats show that very few women who give birth choose to give up their babies. Less than 3% of white unmarried women and less than 2% of black unmarried women give up their child. So, what is your view or what is your take on that?
Honestly, I think adoption is a great alternative to abortion. And if their mommies don't want to give up the babies, that's a great thing as well too. A child, especially us who are in the womb after we're born, God considers us a blessing, and I guarantee you we'll bless mommy and daddy the first time they see us. But if they don't want us, at least give us the chance to live. There's a lot of families out there. I believe my mommy was just talking with somebody the other day, and she said that there's 1.5 million American families on an adoption list waiting to adopt babies. So if you look at the stats of what you said earlier, that there was 1 million abortions in America last year, had they not been aborted but been adopted, there would still be over 500,000 families on the adoption list waiting to have a newborn baby in their family. So again, adoption is a great alternative rather than having an abortion. And the great thing is, us unborn babies, we get to live. I think that's awesome.
All right. Well, I think that is awesome too. You know, um, adoption is a great alternative to have an abortion. You know, if you have the choice between killing a life and saving a life, I would rather save a life. So that's a very good point when it comes to adoption. Now, some pro-choice arguments, they'll also tell you that abortion is a safe medical procedure. So what is your take on that?
Well, as for me, I don't think it's a safe medical procedure because in the end, if it's done, I die. I don't know how that's safe for me. But also, there can be some consequences or there can be some complications that happen later in life. The risk of ectopic pregnancy is increased if other factors such as smoking are present. The chance of miscarriages increases in some cases too. So I wouldn't really consider it a safe procedure, especially if you're trying to terminate my life. I wouldn't think that's safe at all, especially for me.
Okay. Well, you got a valid point there. You know, for the unborn baby, it's definitely not a safe procedure because the unborn baby will die if the abortion is gone through with. So let's look at some of the other reasons. Here we go. One of the other, and this is probably one of the biggest arguments, you know, we hear from, you know, those who are pro-choice. It says, in the case of rape or incest, forcing a woman made pregnant by this violent act would cause further psychological harm to the victim. Often a woman is too afraid to speak up or is unaware she is pregnant, thus the morning after pill is ineffective in these situations. So, you know, as horrible as rape and incest is, and the sad fact is that it does happen. As I shown in the stats earlier, you know, less than 1% of it happens. Now, the fact of the matter is, even though it's less than 1%, it's still a horrific thing, somebody being raped or incest. But should the baby die because of somebody else's actions? So what is your take on that as well?
Well, I think rape or incest should never happen. But the fact of the matter is, me as an unborn baby, I'm not the one who did the crime, so why should I get the punishment? Shouldn't the person who did the crime get the punishment? There should, it should, I, I'm sorry. It just hurts me so much thinking that punishing me, an unborn baby, for somebody else's crime is going to solve the problem. Evil does not work by doing evil. And so on that, in the instance of rape and incest, there is emergency conception pills that you can take up to 5 days later. I don't really know a lot of information on that, but if it stops the pregnancy, that is an alternative that's having an abortion so the woman doesn't get pregnant in the first place, even after a horrific thing like that happens. But the fact of the matter is the perpetrator should be the one getting the punishment, not the unborn baby, because we're innocent. We didn't do anything to deserve this. We're not the ones who committed the rape or committed the incest, so why should we get punished? It should be the perpetrator, the criminal, who gets punished, and let us live.
Okay. That is a valid point. There is what they call emergency conception pills, which stops pregnancy, which can be given to somebody if they are raped or incest happens up to 5 days to stop a pregnancy from or conception from even happening. But the fact of the matter is, even if somebody still gets pregnant, I agree with you. I don't think the baby should be terminated because the unborn child is not the one who committed the crime. And, repaying evil with evil is never the answer. The Bible teaches us to repay evil with good. And so I agree with you. I think the baby should live, and the criminal or the perpetrator should be the one who gets punished, not the unborn innocent child. So those are very good, valid points. So let's go on here. We've got a few more, and then we're going to be out of time here. Now, some say the ability of a woman to have control of her body is critical to civil rights, and taking away her reproductive choice. And so what is your take on that?
Well, I agree in the fact that a woman should have control of her body, but that decision should be made prior to having sex. The fact of the matter is, if you don't want to have a baby, then maybe you shouldn't be doing things in the bedroom. And that's where the choice should be made, not after conception, but before conception. And if you follow the Bible, as I hear my mommy reading the Bible every night, people should do things right by getting married first, and then after getting married, decide to have children, and then have, what is called sex. So I think the decision starts in the bedroom, not after conception.
Okay, that is a very good, valid point too. So we've got two more here. Some of the pro-choice arguments. Let's see. It says taxpayer dollars are used to enable poor women to access the same medical service as rich women, and abortions is one of those services. So what do you think about using taxpayer dollars as well on that?
Well, there's a lot of people that pay taxes, and there's a lot of Americans that are going to agree with abortion. So I don't think tax dollars should be used for it, because if there's people who, like myself and like you, have already said that you're against abortion, then I don't think taxpayer dollars should be used, because I don't want my taxpayer dollars when I get a job to be used on something I don't agree with.
All right, very good point. Let's look at some of these other arguments. It says teenagers who become mothers have grim prospects for the future. What do you think on that argument?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if an abortion happens and it kills me, I have no future at all. So even though they may be teenagers and it may be a rough road, you'll still have a future, so why shouldn't I have a future as well? Again, even though you're a teenager, And your future may be different. At least let me have a future by letting me be born.
That's a good point. And we are running out of time here, so let's just get to the final argument from those who are pro-choice. So like any other difficult situation, abortion creates stress. So what is your final take on that before we have to stop the podcast?
Well, when it comes to abortion, as I already said, you may have stress, but the fact of the matter is, I'll be dead. I'd rather be alive with stress than dead and no life at all. So I think abortion should not be a thing. Let us unborn babies live. Let us have a future. Let us be able to grow up. And I promise you that many of us unborn babies, when we're born, it'll put a big smile on your face. It'll bring tears to your eyes. And we'll love you the rest of our lives. So let all unborn babies live. Thank you.
All right, and thank you. I don't know how you got onto this podcast or what number you called to get on. It was supposed to be my wife, but it's good to hear from the voices of the unborn. So we thank you for your input. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I thought this was a good podcast. We talked about, the differences between pro-choice and pro-life arguments. But as believers, we have to remember that, the sanctity of life is the fundamental when it comes to the Word of God. And we should do everything we can to protect the sanctity of life, whether it's unborn children, whether it's children, whether it's adults, or whether it's the elderly. Every life matters. That's all the time we have for today. God bless all of you, and we will see you next time on Foundations and Frontlines podcast. God bless everybody.